defenders continue to regain control of localities in Kyiv and Chernihiv region. More and more Ukrainian flags are.
안녕하세요. 매일매일 운동하기를 실천하고 있는 동탄 왕코입니다. 오늘은 4월 3일 일요일이에요. 어제도 날씨 진짜 예술이었고 오늘도 날씨가 아주 예술입니다, 여러분. 진짜 이 봄 날씨는 1년에 드물잖아요. 나가서 노셔야 됩니다, 여러분. 하지만 코로나가 끝나지 않았죠. 하루에 20만 명 이상 걸리고 있는데 저는 아직 안 걸렸습니다. 왠지 안 걸릴 것 같아요, 끝날 때까지. 일단은 운동을 하도록 하겠습니다. 지금도 아직도 CNN에서는 전쟁 얘기가 나오고 있습니다. 교황님이 우크라이나로 방문을 한다고 하는데 어떻게 될지 모르겠네요. 일단 저는 운동을 좀 하겠습니다. 요즘에 운동을 좀 안 했더니 살이 많이 나온 것 찰진 것 같아서 운동할 땐 역시 CNN.
From the scene there as firefighters continue to work, and they have been at that scene for several hours already this morning. We were at the scene, and it is a largely industrial area of the city, but there are a number of apartment buildings just across the street from where this fuel depot hit. We spoke with several witnesses who were dangerously close to where the blast detonated this morning. They told us three people told us that in recent days they had seen drones flying over at night these fuel depot area, describing them almost as if they were reconnaissance drones flying over this target. And so that was one of the things that had stood out to them in recent days, in the days leading up to this attack. This is the second time since the invasion of Ukraine started that the city of Odessa has been attacked. The first time it happened was early on. This is the second strike here in the city. It had been relatively quiet for a while, for much of the last week. This is definitely quite the departure from what has happened, but it's also in line with what the types of strikes we have seen from Russia in many parts of the country, where they have been targeting strategic infrastructure like this, fuel depots in various parts of the country. Local officials here this morning, John, are telling us that so far they are not reporting any injuries in the apartment buildings just across the street from the fuel depot. We saw smashed out windows, the impact blowing out windows in the apartment complex. Many people there very troubled and kind of shocked by what they witnessed here in the early hours this morning just before sunrise. John?
Just very quickly, Ed, while we have you, is there any suggestion this fuel depot was being used for military purposes or civilian purposes?
Hard to say, and officials here aren't saying exactly what who counts on that fuel. So I have a hard time kind of just being 100% accurate on what exactly that fuel depot was supporting. But as I mentioned, it's a fuel depot in a highly industrial area of the city.
Okay, Ed, thank you. We appreciate that update. Ed Lavandera, they're live doing some great reporting for us there from Odessa. Thank you. Well, Russian forces withdraw from the capital. They are leaving behind a trail of death and destruction. CNN's Fred Blackett has those details and a warning. Some of the images in his report are graphic.
Well, it's certainly gotten a lot quieter here in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. We have air raid sirens a couple of times during the day, but by and large, it certainly is a lot less than what we've been seeing this past week and even the past couple of days. And the Ukrainians are essentially saying that the Russians are leaving the districts around Kyiv.
여러분 집에서 스트레칭만 해도
This was always part of their plan, and they're
엄청난 운동이
pulling back
됩니다,
right
이거
now.
진짜.
What we're seeing now as the Russians are moving out is that they certainly have taken some serious losses. I was out in some of these districts around Kyiv, and we saw a lot of tank carcasses, destroyed armored vehicles, and then just also positions that were abandoned by the Russians as they moved out of here. The other thing, unfortunately, that we're also finding is that there are still a lot of dead bodies that have yet to be recovered. In fact, there was some video that came out out of a district called Bucha, which is just to the northwest of Kiev, where the streets just seem to be lined with corpses. The Ukrainians now say they're obviously going to try and bring some of them away and clean that whole area up. The Ukrainians, for their part, are saying that this is definitely not the end. They say they believe that the Russian forces were beaten as they tried to invade the capital Kiev, and now essentially trying to regroup. In fact, Ukrainian officials say they believe that attacks will intensify, especially in the southeast of the country, and it's certainly something that they're bracing for.
Fred, thank you. Fred Pleikert there with that report. Now, we'll have more of these human rights abuses on Ukrainian civilians. We're joined now live from Kyiv with Alexandra Matevchuk, a Kyiv-based human rights lawyer. Thank you so much for taking time to speak with us. We'll talk human rights abuses and war crimes in a moment, but first, how are you coping in Kyiv? What's been happening there overnight? Are you feeling a little safer now that the Russian forces appear to be redeploying?
It was the first time when we had white night, but I couldn't sleep. Because for weeks before, we gathered testimonies from people from Bucha, Irpin, and other settlements in Kiev region. But yesterday we saw horrible photos and videos, and it's real shock.
Yeah, there's also reports coming from Ukraine's Attorney General of an investigation underway that Russian soldiers have been using children as human shields, placing them on tanks, using busloads of children in front of armored vehicles, holding them hostage so their parents would not give away their location. What have you heard about that? What do you know?
We try to check such information, but what we can say for current moment that the war crimes have so systematic and large-scale character and occurred in each part where Russian troops are presented or try to occupy, that we can clearly state that Russia uses war crimes as a method of warfare. It can be any excuse, and there is no military necessity in such actions.
It seems war crimes and blatant human rights abuses are being committed in real time across this country, and yet there are no international observers on the ground trying to monitor what's been happening. And there is a risk if they're here, but how crucial is it to have some kind of monitors here right now to witness what's happening rather than starting an investigation long after the fact?
It's very essential because it can provide at least cooling effect of brutality of human rights violations. That's why in the beginning of the march, Euromaidan SOS published open appeal to international organization and asked them to ensure international presence and international monitoring on the ground. Because when the war started, they withdrawn their staff to a safe place of Ukraine or even abroad. But we're still waiting for response for more than a month already.
So clearly there is a need for someone to be here to witness what's happening. What is the situation as far as you know in Bucha? Because we have heard from one Ukrainian member of parliament saying there are mass graves there, civilians, hands tied behind their back, shot in the back of the head, murdered. There are images, some graphic images, which we are seeing from Bucha. What do you understand as to what has happened there during that Russian occupation?
It was a terror against civilians. According to the international humanitarian law, the military has to provide a clear distinction between military and civilian people. But people who were found dead on a street with their hands tied behind their back, they were civilians, they were unarmed, and there were no purpose, no legitimized purpose to kill them. So Russians did it deliberately.
How do you hold these people accountable?
We are working on gathering evidence of war crimes throughout the country with the efforts of hundreds of volunteers of Euromaidan SOS, and we will plan to work with International Criminal Court, with Moscow Mechanism of OSCE, with the newly emerged International Commission of UN Human Rights Council, and we also promote the idea of creation international hybrid tribunal.
Alexandra Matevchuk, thank you for being with us. I wish you well in everything that you're doing, and stay safe, please. Thank you.
Thanks.
Coming up here on CNN Newsroom, a church in a small Ukrainian town has become a temporary home for refugees fleeing Russian attacks. How they made a daring escape, though. That's ahead.
My advice to young people, it's quite interesting that it may look contrarian. I say longevity or experience is what drives your enterprise. Yeah, sometimes when I speak to young people, they say, I want to come in today and become the largest business or the largest bank in our market. I haven't seen that happen in the last 2 decades, and I don't think it's going to happen. Because when you look at the most successful companies in the world today, Apple or Amazon, they have taken time to build. In that time, you build experience, you build knowledge, you understand customers, you build churn. That's what drives business. I think the short-term ambition of make it today at all costs is a very short-term ambition. And because our young people today will live a long life because of health advancements, they have 100 years to live, then they're going to build for the future today.
In 1917, Cartier came upon his breakthrough, revolutionary, by far most famous design, the Cartier tank. Now, the inspiration for this design was, as the name suggests, a British Mark IV tank.
For much of its history, it was an extremely exclusive watch. The tank was made in very small numbers until the mid-1960s. Cartier tanks from before the 1960s especially are tremendously collectible. It's an absolutely iconic design.
This became an elegant symbol, a very desirable watch. Through the ages, we have Jackie Onassis wearing this watch. We have Truman Capote, Andy Warhol, Duke Ellington, Jeff Gordon. Team Tank is a stylish team indeed. It's a rectangular case and it has these very identifiable vertical sidebars called branchards. You can recognize a tank across the room.
Another journalist has died covering Vladimir Putin's war of choice. Maxim Levin was killed by Russian forces near Kyiv, according to the Office of Ukraine's Attorney General. The photojournalist was found unarmed, 2 gunshot wounds. He'd worked for a number of major Western news outlets, including Reuters and the BBC. In a statement, Reuters said it's deeply saddened by his loss and called his death a huge loss to the world of journalism. In his bio, Levin described himself as a documentary photographer, videographer, a father, and a human being. Well, even as Russia pulls back in some parts of the country, aid groups are struggling to get Ukrainians out of harm's way. The International Committee for the Red Cross has managed to get to the battered city of Irpin in recent days. There, they've treated the injured, they've delivered food, and they hope to return next week with more essential supplies. The aid group tried, but was unable to reach Mariupol on Saturday. Even after arrangements were made, conditions were still impossible for that convoy to proceed. Some 100,000 residents remain trapped in Mariupol. And according to the United Nations, more than 4.1 million refugees have fled Ukraine since this war began. And Ukraine says more than 4,000 people were evacuated through humanitarian corridors on Saturday. But with Russian attacks making it hard to keep the corridors open, some refugees are finding their way to safety through more unconventional methods. Here's CNN's Ben Wiedemann.
Everything will be all right, he sings, for every one of us. Words of comfort for those desperately in need. Popular singer and former lawmaker Sviatoslav Vakarchuk goes from village to village with a simple message. Smile. This church in the village of Bashtanka is now home, temporary home, for those who have managed to flee Russian-occupied territory. Volunteering in the kitchen, Svetlana Lyashuk finds peace, but not peace of mind. It's really hard, says Svetlana. People here are very nice, but I just want to go home. Vitaly Butochel, a mechanic in peacetime, now runs a complex operation feeding and housing the displaced.
This war make us like a family, very close.
The church feels like an oasis of the ordinary, far from the madness outside. Early evening and a bus approaches, marked Deti, Russian for children. Alas, no guarantee of safety. It's coming from the town of Snihorivka, under Russian control. But it didn't pass through a humanitarian corridor negotiated by the Red Cross. The arrangement whereby these people are able to get out of the Russian-occupied areas to here is very simple. Men on the bus give Russian soldiers food and cigarettes, and the Russian soldiers let them pass. Larisa Shevchenko made it out, but remains tormented by fear for those who couldn't get away. Everything is really bad, she says. Her parents in Snihorivka are still hiding out in the basement. She hopes they'll get out tomorrow. Ben Wiedemann, CNN, Bashtanka, southern Ukraine.
For many people fleeing Ukraine, Poland is their first stop on a journey to safety. CNN's Selma Abdelaziz is just across the border from here in Ukraine, in Poland. She's at a border town there where many of these Ukrainian refugees have been arriving. So Selma, what's the scene there like today?
John, this is the the train station right here on the border, that hundreds of families flee through every single day. And it's still a very sleepy, snowy Sunday morning here, but we've just heard another train is about to arrive. You have to understand that these train times are not consistent given the situation on the ground. Volunteers essentially show up and they ask around, when's the next train coming? How can we help? And I just want to show you around this train because it's really become a halfway point for these refugees. You can see there's a reception point over there that you can sign up as soon as you come in. They're going to offer you a hot cup of coffee, they're going to offer you a tea, they're going to offer you a warm smile, and they're going to want to make you feel welcome. And you see all these people in high-vis jackets. All of these are volunteers. They're here to answer questions. They're here to give people a sense of dignity, a sense of comfort. You have to remember that many of these families don't know what they're doing next, John. They come here and then they start ringing the phones. They start asking about friends. They might find someone with a sign that says Destination Unique and hitch a ride with them. It's really touch and go for all of these families. I'm just going to keep showing you around. Basic medical assistance here. We know that there's some paramedics and an ambulance outside if anybody needs to be checked out. There's specific signs for women who are pregnant or with babies that might need medical attention. And this hallway down here, you're going to see this has basically become a waiting area. And people overnight here, they sleep here, they just take a few hours here to take a beat, take a breath. And yes, of course, this looks absolutely chaotic, and it is at times, this hallway, just completely packed with people sleeping here, laying here. They fled war, but they don't know what's next. I'm just going to keep walking down this hallway to give you a sense of this space. And I think what's astounding is just how many children you see, John. And again, people have come with just what they can carry. So these kids have small toys that they're keeping distracted with. Oftentimes, that's about it. Just outside, there is a food kitchen, a little tent food kitchen to give people food, a warm meal. They've already started serving breakfast this morning, and down this way there's a playroom that kids can play in once it's opened up, and here's a little first aid station. So Yes, this is a beautiful train station, actually, just looking at it. It's a 19th century embroidered with golds and trims and all of this, but it's become, again, just this halfway point for refugees coming out of Ukraine to take a moment here, find these volunteers, get a warm cup of tea, get a meal, and try to figure out what's next. So far, 2.4 million, just over 2.4 million of these refugees are here in Poland, John.
It looks like a tragic scene from World War II in so many ways, Selma. But when the Ukrainians arrive, you say some just don't have a plan. They don't know if they'll stay in Poland. They don't know if they'll move on to other countries. But how long will the Polish government, I guess, will continue to accept refugees? Because they've already taken in more than 2 million. I guess they've given every indication that they'll take more, but there has to be a ceiling at some point, surely.
Well, for the Polish government, they've been very open that they want to welcome these refugees, that they feel a sense of connection. And that doesn't just happen at a governmental level, as you know, John. There are families that we've seen just show up at these train stations and say, hey, I can take you in for a week. I can take you in for a couple of weeks. How can I help? There's a deep sense of connection to what's happening to the families in Ukraine, and that connection reaching back to families here in Poland. And they really want to help out. But you hear over and over British government saying, we can't carry this alone. We need help. We need the international community to step in. So they're asking for support, but they want to keep their doors open.
God bless. Selma, thank you. Selma Abdelaziz, great reporting from Poland. Thank you. Well, Putin's war in Ukraine, increasing the pressure on his political allies, like Hungary's Viktor Orban. Voting is underway right now in the toughest re-election bid the right-wing prime minister has faced in more than a decade. His opponent has argued that Orban is simply a Russian leader wannabe. CNN's Matt Rivers has more now from Budapest.
Viktor Orban, by most measures, is the EU leader closest to Vladimir Putin recently. Just 3 weeks before the war began, Orban took a trip to Moscow, welcomed by Putin across a very long table. National elections in Hungary on Sunday will test whether Orban's 12-year run as prime minister will go another 4 years, and his relationship with Putin is suddenly at the center of Hungarian politics. What began as a campaign focused on local issues now has opposition leaders determined to link Orban with Putin and his bloody war in Ukraine, with political attack ads painting Orban as Moscow's puppet, a strongman leader determined to side with authoritarian Russia instead of the democratic West. This ad saying, quote, we want Hungary to be a Western country again. If you're voting for Orban, you're voting for Putin. Or this one saying, quote, Orban, tell your friend of 12 years, don't kill. Orban has undeniably supported Putin, vetoing sanctions against Moscow over the years and expanding the Russian-Hungarian partnership.
For Russian policies of Viktor Orban are a very important building block of his entire political vision, are now exposed.
And with Putin's popularity plummeting, the opposition calculus is simple. Orban plus Putin equals a winning political strategy. But not so fast. Because Orban is fighting back. Call it a flip-flop, call it a pivot, but Orban is no longer Putin's best buddy. Even though he's not openly criticizing him personally, the Hungarian leader went along with initial EU sanctions against Russia, has described the invasion as Russian aggression, and despite being vehemently anti-immigrant for years now, has let in hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian refugees in the past few weeks. He says we are a great country which gives everything to people who are fleeing trouble. Since the war began, Orban has refused to let weapons pass through Hungary to Ukraine or provide military aid, but he's deflected any criticism of that by claiming he is simply a man of peace, counting on the notion that many Hungarians want nothing to do with the war.
The gut reaction of most of the public is that, oh, we should just not get involved with this thing. Yeah?
And Orban has taken advantage of that sentiment.
That's what they are trying.
Whether it works remains to be seen, but polling, which isn't always reliable in Hungary, has Orban and his party out in front. One big name the opposition hopes will change that.
Послухай, Вікторе, знаєш, що відбувається в Маріуполі? Ви самі вирішите, за кого ви.
That's, of course, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who has criticized what he calls Orban's lack of support for Ukraine's fight for its existence. But it's not clear if that will be enough. At an anti-Orban rally on Saturday, Ukraine flags flew and the crowd kept pushing the Orban-Putin narrative. But not many people showed up. Whether that's an ominous sign for the opposition or just the result of cold, rainy weather, we'll find out when the votes come in. Matt, CNN, Budapest, Hungary.
A quick reminder now, if you would like to help the people of Ukraine, please go to cnn.com/impact. Last time we checked, CNN viewers like you have helped raise more than $7 million to help people in need in Ukraine and neighboring countries, help provide shelter, food, and other essential. If you can, please help. Thank you for watching. I'm John Ward, live in Lviv, Ukraine. For our international viewers, please stay with us. Vital Signs with Dr. Sanjay Gupta is up next. For our viewers in North America, we will be back with more breaking news after a short break.
Thinking of banking in Africa? Think Zenith. In today's fast-moving, fast-changing world, you need a financial partner that understands your unique expectations. A bank with presence in major financial centers across the world, with the enabling platform to facilitate seamlessly, whenever, wherever, however. A bank with best-in-class financial solutions from a superb combination of technology and human touch for easy, fast, and secure banking that creates real value. Turning dreams into reality is now in your hands. People, technology, service. Zenith Bank, in your best interest.
As the sun sets in Seoul and Shanghai, deals are signed in Dubai, and Europe is already in play. New York prepares to make its first move. I'm Julia Chastity, host of CNN's First Move. I'll speak to newsmakers, risk takers, and the ultimate game changers. Bold moves, big deals, winning trades. It's all right here. Make CNN your first move.
First Move with Julia Chatterley, weeknights.
Business is all about making connections. But some connections are easier to make than others.
28분.
With a CNN, the world is always at your fingertips.
팔굽혀펴기 마지막만 하고 씻겠습니다.
Heard it all before? But have you heard it like this?
The ultimate disruptor looks set to shake up our world. We really can't ignore the impact that this has. What can we do that explores a fresh angle? So let's untangle the players and political forces. The truth is a lot more complex. What's really going on?
Fast-paced news, in-depth reports, and fact checks from the perspective of the Global Brief. Bianca Nobilo. Saturday on CNN.
I'm Dr. Sanjay Gupta in New York, and this is CNN.
Vital Signs, in association with BDMS, Bangkok Yusuf Medical Services, your trusted healthcare network.